Lockdown is being eased in different ways in different parts of the United Kingdom, and sport is coming back. Premier League football is due to kick off again, snooker is returning, and horse racing is back under starters' orders. But what about sports like athletics, swimming, sailing, rowing, and the others? This is Anything But Footy, the Olympic and Paralympic sport podcast. I'm Michael.
And I'm John, and in this episode we're joined by two journalists who make their living writing and talking about sports that we love too. Athletics, swimming, basketball, and even footy. But how has lockdown been for them? How are they surviving on little sporting action? And what about the sports they cover? Do they agree with us there's a long way back to some kind of normality, including particularly indoor sports and events?
I'm Liz Byrnes. I'm a sports journalist. I worked for PA for 12 years before going freelance 2014. I've covered swimming, athletics, football, you name it, lots of different sports. But now I'm sort of like European Correspondent for Swimming World, which is a US-based website.
And I'm Mark Woods. I'm a freelance sports writer like Liz, writing for lots of newspapers in the UK and in the US. My beat's a bit like Mike and John, Olympic, Paralympic sports. I do a lot of athletics. I do a lot of basketball. And lockdown's been quite an interesting time.
We should, of course, reinforce the point that we are recording this socially distanced from each other, all in our own homes. You can always get in touch with us on Anything But Footy via our website, anythingbutfooty.com. And you can find us on social media as well, on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. So we'll start with you, Mark. You said it's been an interesting time, lockdown. How have you been able to carry on your work?
I think certainly things have very much changed in two ways. One, there's no live sports. And while we all have our contacts and there are still athletes, sports people to speak to who still have interesting tales, some who are doing incredible roles, perhaps related to healthcare at this present time, you also have to be aware that a lot of sports reporting is about the sport that's going on right in front of you at any moment in time. So the dearth of that has presented a huge challenge for every sports journalist, every sports broadcaster, in the current climate. And also, you look at the future of the media as well. I mean, it's a big picture thing at the moment. The economy is not going well. It is not predicted to get any better. The media will take a big hit out of this. Newspapers were not doing massively well, with a few exceptions before we went into this. The outlook's not particularly great. And for sports journalists, particularly freelance ones like myself and Liz, that's going to present troubles and challenges going forward.
What kind of challenges, Liz, have you experienced then over the past couple of months?
Well, I mean, I'd say challenges in as much as, I mean, some of it's just completely gone, like the football work, because there's no live sport, and as a freelancer, it's not like I'm a staffer, it's just completely gone. So, obviously I didn't do the press conferences. There's nothing like that going. So that's completely, out of the, just out of the ballpark, really. There's nothing there. I mean, what I found, and I think Mark might well have found this as well, is that actually one of the benefits of it, not one of the benefits, but what I've noticed is that, this time has been when the fostering of contacts and the forging of contacts has really come to the fore. This is where I've really benefited from long-term work on sports, because you can access those people, you can access those Olympic champions and world champions, and they're happy to talk. Now, you have to look forward as well, with what you're asking them. There's only so many times you can ask them if they're in a pool in the back garden. So yeah, I mean, there are different challenges, but I agree with Marcus. What kind of media world is it going to be? And I just see it, I think it's accelerated what might have happened anyway. I think it's just brought it along quicker, that maybe we are going down the niche road anyway, but the papers themselves, they're surely just going digital, or, some might just cease operation.
One of the things I was going to ask, we've seen BuzzFeed announcing their closure of their news department this week. Joe.co.uk has gone into administration. These kind of new websites where people were getting their news from couldn't really survive what was going on in lockdown. Papers, as you say, have had a bit more longevity and have maintained that. But do you think, Liz, you mentioned about you work for a swimming website in the US. Do you think that actually and Mark, we know a lot of people who work for The Athletic, which is a paid for subscription website for football. Do you think that really could be the future, that there is more behind paywall, unfortunately, moving forward? Or is that a good thing?
Well, I mean, I think it works both ways, doesn't it? I mean, I think The Athletic, the model is, I can't think of any other publication or outlet in Britain that is similar, and they do pay very, very well as well, don't they? As it should be, because it's apparently so.
I wouldn't know. It was never an option for me.
I've got some personal news. Yeah. The thing about the internet is that there's so much information out there, and there is so much free information, that I think if you're going to go behind a paywall, you have to offer something different. And I think you absolutely have to be a trusted source. You have to be the go-to place. So you have to have very good people on board. And I think, was it Boxing News who did this, and they won at the Sports Journalism Awards this year. So, it's worked with them, but I think it does take some work, to take it off the ground and for it to actually be profitable is, it would also come down to, advertising, wouldn't it? As well as subscription. So you've got to give people a reason why.
I think also models change, and, people's perception and the way that they access sport has changed during this. And I was speaking to someone at a streaming service, and a very large one, international one, last week, and I said, well, how hard is this impact on you, in terms of what you're trying to build? And he said the big cultural shift that they see, although it's been problematic for their business, is that now we've all become completely attuned to going on Netflix or Amazon or all these app-based services that you have out there. So it's no longer that fixed thing. Even we all remember when something like going on a satellite dish was novel. That's become the norm. Now the new normal is get things where you want to get them, and I think that will, to an extent, apply for paid for services like The Athletic, for newspapers who want to put more behind a paywall. I think we've become much more attuned to, and I think the last 2 months is in a small way advance that process. So now if you want something, you recognize that you pay for it, and actually the fear factor in accessing it on a laptop, on an app, on a streaming box has probably been dissipated even more.
Just quickly on your own businesses and what you've been doing, has it helped having kind of a retention, so being kind of a correspondent for swimming, or having regular income rather than having to sell each story individually?
Well, yeah, certainly good grief, for myself, yeah. it must be, I know people, and I'm sure we all know people who were 100% based on reporting, and didn't have any contracts, no retainers, and it's just gone, absolutely gone, especially the football reporting. Because there's just nothing there. So, I'm just very relieved, to be honest, because otherwise it would just have been, I don't know, just completely scary. It must be for people.
I think I've seen that. There are people out there, colleagues, great colleagues, who are suffering really badly just now. And I feel quite fortunate, like Liz, that the contacts that you make, and I have some very, very supportive editors who have been terrific through these. Some others who at the start of this came to me and said, we have no budget for the next foreseeable future. Others who just stopped taking calls. And there was an admission there, because they have to cut budgets because advertising revenues are down. Up front, they said, you're out for the next while. Others, brilliantly, who didn't do that have kept work coming in. But I think it's a tough market, I think, outside of football going forward, because we all know now with hits on websites, editors are much more able to make informed decisions on which stories will generate clicks. We know that if you have a blog on Liverpool Everton, it will get 1,000 times more than a report from a swimming meeting. That's the reality of it. And if you're going to spend your budget on the things that drive clicks going forward, that is going to pose a lot of difficulty for people like ourselves, yes, but also for those sports to generate coverage. I think they will have to be much more smarter from a PR point of view, smarter with how they work with people like us. We will have to become smarter in turn about how we sell those stories, present those stories. So the budgetary issue of coming out of all this, I think, will be a massive factor, both for journalists and for sports.
I was going to say, in swimming and athletics and stuff, it's, especially in swimming, it's that age-old thing of, some journalists they feel they turn up, once every 4 years. There's the public interest once every 4 years, and then it goes until the next Olympics. And obviously, we don't have the Olympics until next year. Now, you're absolutely right. It's going to be really difficult. And I think maybe it's going to be, sort of, almost powered by the athletes themselves. And, I think someone like Adam Peaty is very savvy.
And Liz, you've kind of preempted what I was going to ask you there. Have you found that actually access to athletes, the likes of Adam Peaty, which in the past maybe might have only happened under quite a controlled situation, and we've all been at those media days where you get your round table or your 5 minutes, whatever, with the athletes. Have you found actually with lockdown and with athletes having more time, that you're actually getting below the surface of them a little bit more over the past few months?
Yeah, I mean, I found access, sort of pretty straightforward, really. But, a lot of it is because I've sort of, when you work in a sport, as you know, that, you forge those contacts over time. It is, I mean, I've always believed, I was always taught, that you forge relationships and it's based on respect, it's mutual trust and that sort of thing. And I think it's in this sort of time that, I've certainly found that, that sort of comes to fruition, for a better way of putting it. So I've been able to get in touch with people like Adam. But yeah, I mean, it's what I have found really interesting is that I've talked to people in different countries. So I've got really different perspectives as well of what's going on with lockdown. So it's, I've actually found access pretty straightforward.
I think it's been an intriguing time for athletes and for governing bodies and agents, I suppose, people who are responsible for athletes, because we've all wanted to write about sport and there isn't sport there. So where do you find your stories if you're a media outlet? You want to speak to people, you want to find opportunities out there. And I think the very smart athletes and the smart sports have come to the fore in the last while. I mean, if you flick through the papers or log on to websites, you can get a sense of which sports are still getting coverage, and a lot of positive coverage. I mean, if you want positive coverage, now's the time to get it, because they've been out there, and you see athletes on social media doing interesting things, or appearing on podcasts or whatever, and making themselves available for interviews if you get in touch with them. You see the governing bodies who are putting people up. I mean, the great example that I was reading, there's a piece in the Yorkshire Post a few days ago at Danny Rubin, the head of comms at the England and Wales Cricket Board, who has been doing weekly Zoom calls with one of his players who's continued to be accessible and has roundly has got a lot of praise for doing that. And the sports who have been switched on and saying we will still make people out there for chats, have been getting wealth of space, and fair play to them. You also, the flip side, see the sports that have gone into a bunker who perhaps don't actually have good relationships with their own athletes to make them available. That's been a case in a few major sports at the moment. And when you don't have football, there's been space and there's been time with journalists going a begging, and some sports have taken advantage during lockdown. They'll see the value of that when we come out of it. There's other sports that have disappeared from view, and they're going to suffer in the longer term from that. So I think if you're an athlete and you've been putting yourself out there and being accessible, people don't forget that. You help the media out in a small way. We're not that important, but you helped us when we were in need. Going forward, that's going to benefit you and your brand if that's what you're trying to build.
Before we dig into a little bit about athletics and swimming and how we get back to some kind of normality, just a quick plug for some of your stories. What are your best stories in lockdown, both of you, that you've people should go and read after listening to this podcast? Well,
I said I was talking to people from different countries, so getting a different perspective. I like that, the sort of overview, really, of Sara Sjöström, Olympic champion, swimming champion. She's in Sweden, so she's just having the normal, basically normal, whatever that is now. There was very little lockdown or anything, very few measures over there. So she was quite interesting. But also I spoke to Chad Leclos, and he was talking about he'd been walking along the road in Durban, just going to the shop with his girlfriend. And then, suddenly people jumped out of nowhere and surrounded them asking for money. And he was, but it was very much, he was trying to shine a light on the, the effect of coronavirus on the people who are poor in South Africa. So that was an interesting story, his take on that, and how it's sort of like affected his long-term view, and he said, if the Olympics don't happen next year, yeah, it's awful, but I mean, it's not, for him, he said it'd be a hard pill to swallow, but in the grand scheme of things, these guys have got absolutely nothing. They've just been destroyed. So I think that's one of my favourite ones, really. Yeah.
Mark?
And that's on Swimming World.
I think a couple of stories that stick out. One was talking to the athlete, the hammer thrower, Mark Dry, recently, for a piece of the Sunday Mail about his drugs case and the real injustice that he sees of it, and a lot of people see, about ending up with a 4-year ban for essentially telling a white lie about where he was when testers came to his home. And it's whether you agree with his case or not agree with it, it is fascinating to see how these things personally impact on athletes when you put the hardship there and your world's turned upside down. We all see the glamour of someone like him competing at Olympics, the years it puts in. But then when it all falls apart, then he was incredibly honest about what it went to him and the consequences on a personal basis that come out of that. And then I think the most impactful story, I guess, that I wrote, and reading it back and listening to it back, was an interview I did with the father of one of our very few former NBA players, Robert Archibald, who committed suicide a few months ago, and his father Bobby gave me a very honest and very frank interview in the Mail on Sunday a few weeks ago, talking about what happened and the perils of mental health, when you're at the biggest stage of them all and you're left then to fend for yourself. And there is an extended version if anyone wants to listen to it on my podcast, the MVP cast. But it was searing honesty and the heartbreak of it all, and a reminder for all of us that there is that glamorous side, and you see the incredible work athletes have to do, but sometimes when they step off that treadmill at the end of it all, it's a big gaping chasm. And a lot of us follow athletes' careers until they retire. We sometimes forget about them after they leave the scene, and what happens afterwards sometimes isn't too pretty.
You're listening to Anything But Footy, the Olympic and Paralympic sport podcast. We're talking about what happens next for sport post-lockdown with freelance journalists Liz Byrnes and Mark Woods.
Mark, I'm sure John's got a couple of questions for you shortly about how athletics sees itself going forward and some of the financial implications of the cancellation of the anniversary games. But Liz, it would have been around about this sort of time that we probably would have bumped into each other at the British Swimming Championships, the Olympic trials, no diving World Series finale in London. How do our aquatic athletes, our swimmers, our artistic swimmers, our water polo players, and our divers, how do they get back to doing what they were doing with the lockdown measures and social distancing and everything else that we're now going to have to learn to live our lives by?
I think it's interesting. I mean, I think it's very different for each discipline. I mean, I don't see how, because obviously water polo is such a contact sport. Synchro by its nature's contact. At least that's sort of, it's a program. So, and it's choreographed, whereas water polo, it's completely unpredictable and what have you. But, I mean, I was talking to one of the swimmers over in the Netherlands, Arno Kaminga, and he was saying they'd been back in the water about 3 weeks now, and what they do is that they go down one lane and back up the next lane. So basically they're doing a huge loop, and I wonder maybe is that how we're going to be doing it, because they have now talked about the phase one with the swimmers, haven't we? We're on step one, and that a total of 32 swimmers from the two national centres in Bath and Loughborough, they're going to be able to get back into some sort of training, some sort of individualized program. But I don't know how it's going to actually pan out. Are they just going to have one or two people in the pool at any one time? But then that obviously, it's different for the guys in Stirling, isn't it? And people like Duncan Scott and Amy Wilmot, Ross Murdoch, and the guys in Wales as well, like Dan Jervis. So it's all happening at different times. I think that in terms of the fact that they don't know when their next competition is, kind of works both ways. So they're not used to, as athletes, they're used to planning, aren't they? And, everything's the stepping stone. Whereas now they don't have that. But then again, it means they do have time. So they do have the time to get back in. There's kind of no rush in that way, but I think a lot of them need to get back in psychologically. The people I've talked to, they talk about their catch in the water, the feel of the water. That's what they've missed. And also a couple of the sprinters. So I spoke to Ben Proud, and he was talking about there's nothing you can do to, sort of in any way imitate an explosive dive. There's nothing he can really do. He just had to keep on top of his fitness. So it's going to take a long time to get back to, I don't know how they're ever going to get back to having 8 people in a pool. How, when they have 8 people in a final or heats, I don't see when that's going to happen, or if it's going to in the next year.
And I think also the wider swimming community, people
Absolutely.
like to go swimming just for fitness or for leisure. I can't see that being any time soon. I know that Swim England are working really hard to try and work out a plan for when they go back. But as you say, when on earth will that be?
There's no hint, is there? Because, it's just, I think they're just going to have to regulate people so much. I think we're going to have to all book allocated times to go. I don't think we're just going to be able to turn up. And then, they will have restricted numbers. I can only see that's the only way it's going to happen. Because the one thing they don't want is people getting to the end at the same time and turning at the same time. Especially, people will be coughing, and what have you. Are we going to have perspex up? I don't know. There are going to be ways to do it. They're going to have to on so many different levels, but I don't think it's for a little while yet. But I do think one thing that's a concern is that there are people who now are, they're pool swimmers, but are going out and doing open water, but they don't have the experience at all. And that to me is a worry, because they're also talking about it in terms of wild swimming. So people going to very secluded spots, but they may be going alone, and if you've not done open water swimming, it is so different. It is so different. I'm quite experienced at it, but I had to be fished out a couple of years ago because I just got really bad cramp because I hadn't taken enough water. And thanks for someone there who did fish me out. So, so if you're not used to it and if you're by yourself, it's very dangerous, I think.
And you mentioned the elite swimmers are back and should be training, as you say, in Loughborough and Bath as we move forward. But the divers certainly aren't, and also the para swimmers. There's no, these guys are not being included at the moment. And you don't, obviously with women's football being cancelled in this country while the Premier League comes back, you don't want, I hate to say it, the minority sports, because they're not minority sports, but those sports being left behind. And I think that is a key thing for all the administrators.
One of the problems I think that they've got, and you talked about the Loughborough, Bath and Stirling issue there, is that if you look at the UK sport guidelines in terms of what facilities can be used in different sports to return from it, it's very high level. So you have to have absolutely every box ticked to be able to reopen, even from the stage 1 of elite training. You need to have medical care, you need to have social distancing, you need to have all the sports scientists there to do testing on a daily basis, etc. That costs a lot of money. So, and you need the resources for that one. So there is only a very limited amount of places that you can do. So look at swimming. You've got the 2 centres. The guys in Stirling are sitting around going, well, can we go to Loughborough to train? Well, actually, under the rules right now, you're not allowed to travel to Loughborough from Scotland. So it all becomes very complicated. And when you get to sports where you're training in public facilities, I was looking at diving into this issue of where people can train now if you're in this elite level. And there are very few of those facilities up and down the land that tick all the boxes just now. So for diving, most of those are in a public pool. So if you're attached to a public facility right now, that's off limits. So what point are those guys even allowed to sneak in through a side door when the rest of the building is shut? No one really knows right now. That the complications with 4 different parts of the country having different rules actually are below the surface now, making things very, very complicated for a lot of athletes. So for something like swimming, you will have lots of different people going at lots of different speeds just now within the aquatics world. And in different countries, people will be going at different speeds as well. So you may be at a big advantage if you're in early, or a huge disadvantage if you're coming out late.
And Mark, let's just bring it back to athletics for a minute, which obviously is the sport that John and I know you best from in terms of our various years and competitions that we've worked on together. What kind of impact will British athletics see? And I mean here the governing body, from the fact that essentially their season has been wiped out. commercially, it's not viable for British athletics to have a behind closed doors event. It just doesn't add up for them. They don't have the broadcast deals, as Joanna Coates, the new CEO, was saying in Athletics Weekly. So what will be the impact on not being able to stage some of those big events like the anniversary games this year?
Well, it's a top to bottom impact. I mean, if you take roughly an estimate of £2 million out of the pot for not having the anniversary games, I know that what I'm hearing is they can't stage the Diamond League in Gateshead. If that's behind closed doors financially, it's not viable. So therefore you lose the two big meetings. That's revenue that's gone. You've seen UK Athletics return some of that money to the grassroots through the four home nations associations. They've all been told you're not getting that handout this year. So therefore they've got planned work, budgeted work they want to do to develop the sport that's now in danger. You look at the elite end of how you fund all the coaches, all those programs going into Tokyo. That's a lot of that's up in the air just now. I mean, there's a big job to reform UK athletics. The financial underpinning of that is in danger because you don't have the two big heavy-hitting meetings that bring in a lot of the revenue. So it's a very difficult time if you're coming in as a new chief executive of a governing body just now, and then there's challenges that Joe wouldn't have expected, when she sat down to interview for the job. So I think from the top end, we see the big glamorous meetings. At the grassroots, at a local club, the pain will be felt as well.
If you're Joanna Coates, the new CEO, how tough is it coming in lockdown? Because you can't actually meet anybody. And how do you make decisions about how you're going to move things forward? I think, again, in that Athletics Weekly piece, she said she wanted to have a very good plan. Well, how do you do that while nothing's running, or actually there are bigger questions that need sorting ahead of some of the other issues that the UK sport investigation and the Salazar stuff and all that?
I think certainly she's been meeting people. She's been speaking to a lot of people via Zoom or whatever format she's been using. So I think actually people have had time to sit down and have detailed chats with her. And I think from folk I've spoken to, she's been very open to listening to ideas and taking feedback and trying to get a sense of what those within the sport want going forward and the criticisms that they might have. I think they're in an interesting position that if the Olympics had gone ahead this summer, she would have had probably a holding pattern to say, let's get through this, then let's make radical changes. And it's not that far away. Now you've got Olympics 12 months later than planned. You have to make major changes. Everyone knows that there are structural issues within the sport, personal issues within the sport. There is no way you can wait until next year. She will have to act quickly. UK sport has put them under pressure. The home nations have put them under pressure to shake up the way that things are running. So she will have to move quicker. And I think when you're in lockdown, that will not stop. And I would expect coming out of this that there will be a series of changes at UK athletics, whether it's people, whether it's approaches, whether it's the culture, which she said she wants to change. All these can't wait, even during lockdown. And, yes, there might not be an athletic season this year. There will be a lot of management time being spent to look at where UK athletics is by the end of 2020.
And I know we've not got a long time left, but I just want to ask one big question to both of you. And that is the structure of sport in this country, and Mark was talking about it there in terms of British athletics, the home nations. Liz, is the structure of sport in this country just too complicated? Have we got too many governing bodies? Is this an opportunity to trim it down slightly?
I think because everything has to be, all the boxes have to be ticked, don't they? And it's all very much lots of not lots of red tape. I don't know if red tape's the right way of putting it, but I mean, I don't really see how we need to trim it down. It might be forcibly trimmed down because of the money. I think we do have to look at, I would say that there's that, but I think we also have to look at it in terms of things like, the grassroots levels and the administration and how, how the funding is going to get down there. I just think that it might be something they don't have any choice in because there's, going to be such a gaping hole in the funding that it could well be that governing bodies are streamlined, for want of a better way of putting it.
Let me put it like this. British cycling, for example, have a remit where they have to do grassroots cycling, mass participation. They have to go to the Olympics, the Paralympics, and win medals. In athletics, you've got British athletics, you've got England athletics, Scotland athletics. Then you look at Team GB, which is funded by commercial agreements. Para GB is a charity. UK Sport is the government agency that funnels the money to them. Is that too many organisations? Do you have a view on it, Mark?
It's a symptom of our country, isn't it? The way our country is run. If you were to sit down and design the United Kingdom from scratch, you would never design it the way it's designed now. It's an absolute, as someone that did a politics degree, we are one of the worst run countries in the world for the way we're set up. And that spills into sport, and there's no way around it. You could say, as some might argue, that you just have one governing body for athletics and you dump the 4 home nations. That doesn't work because of funding, because they all get funded separately for different issues at grassroots. It just happens that way. It's stupid, it's ridiculous, but it's a legacy of the way the UK was set up. But I think going back to the sort of slightly more serious point, that yes, sports need to look for economies of scale. Sports need to look smarter at the moment. There's lots of sports that relied on a couple of big ticket events, or sports like netball, where it's been cancelled, where you were building something and you hadn't got people coming through the door. If that's what you were relying upon, you need to now make sure that you have a plan B, because who knows if this is going to happen again.
And to finish with, I'm going to put another really tough question for you, because things change on a daily basis. 1 week doesn't look the same at the moment, and you can never predict what's going to happen. A month ago, I didn't want football to come back, and now, well, okay, yeah, we'll see how it goes in a couple of weeks. The Tokyo 2020 Olympics in 2021, are they going to actually take place?
We actually can't say, can we? I do think, I mean, they've said themselves, haven't they, that it's going to be really different anyway. Just so it's almost like expect something that's completely condensed. I mean, we've got 11,000 athletes that are meant to go in. I don't see how that can happen. But some have already qualified. So they can't say that they're not qualified, and they're going to also honour that, aren't they? Honour those who've been qualified. We're not going to start again. So I think it'll be things like, I think there'll be a huge cull of the number of broadcasters in, because I think it's meant to be, is it 20,000 that usually go? I think we're going to go down to, a tiny percentage of that. I think it'll really change that, because things like mixed zones we're not going to be able to have, especially when we're going to have, say, Japanese athletes going through, or we're going to have the really big names in whatever sport going through, and people are just going to come and mob people. We're just not going to be able to have it. I don't know when we're going to find out, but I imagine that they will wait to sort of mid-March again to make the decision. I think it will be earlier. But I think if we do see it, it will be very, very different and very much condensed as well.
Yeah, I think fundamentally the IOC need to think, can we have all the athletes there that we were supposed to have? If you look at how you put it on an event like that, how you put it on it so that TV want it, so they still pay the rights fees, the sponsors pay the rights fees, which is ultimately the most important thing, sadly. Can you or will you cut the number of athletes that go? I think you have to. And those lovely stories that we have of someone coming last in a 400-meter seat, but was never going to get anywhere, from a very small island somewhere in the South Pacific. You may have to go. Sadly, this time you can't come, because we can't afford that amount of bodies on the ground in terms of social distance, in terms of managing things there. I think you can cut back certain events. I think it won't be as lavish looking. It wouldn't be appropriate for it to be as lavish as it was before. Will it go ahead? Who knows right now? But I think in the all singing, all dancing Olympics and Paralympics that we would have wanted to see in Tokyo, no chance.
Our thanks to Liz Byrnes and Mark Woods for joining us on Anything But Footy.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
If you'd like to have your say, go to our website, anythingbutfooty.com.